All right, so today we're going to continue using trigonometry and an assignment in applications, or in other words, word problems. When we have a word problem, we're going to read that word problem, we're going to draw a diagram, and interpret information. Since we're dealing with right triangles, you're going to want to draw a right triangle. And then we're going to label our diagram, opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse, and figure out which trig function to use. Write our equation and solve. Now notice I drew a picture over on the right hand side. I have a person looking up at a hot air balloon. So you can see that person looking up has that angle of elevation, and that person in the hot air balloon looking down is the angle of depression. It creates that Z shape that we looked at before. So we have that hidden transversal making that angle 38 and this angle 38 alternate interior angles. And that's where I come up with saying that the angle of depression is congruent to the angle of elevation. 9 times out of 10, I like to use the angle of elevation even when they give me the angle of depression. So when you see the angle of depression, we're going to include it in our picture, but I'm going to move it to help me make the problem go a lot smoother. So in our first example, it says we have a flagpole that casts a shadow that is 137 feet long. The angle of elevation between the end of the shadow to the top of the flagpole is 25 degrees. How tall is the flagpole? So the first thing you're going to want to do is sketch out a picture. That picture should have a flagpole and a shadow. So you can see here is my picture. So here's my flagpole. My shadow's on the bottom. Now that 25 degrees is that angle of elevation. So here's my angle of elevation inside my picture because it's going upward. And it's telling me that we need to know the height of the flagpole. So you see I have X on my diagram and the shadow is on the bottom. So we're going to label our picture. Now remember, when we're labeling for trig, we're thinking about SOHCAHTOA. We're thinking about where our angle is. So our angle is at the bottom. So next to it, that 137 is my adjacent side. And across from it is my opposite side. So thinking back to SOHCAHTOA, which trig function am I going to use? Well, I have an O and an A, so I'm going to be using tan. So tan 25 equals opposite over adjacent, so X over 137. All right, so then we already have our equation. We're going to toss tan 25 over 1 to create our proportion and cross multiply. When we cross multiply, we're going to have 137 tan 25 equals X. So here I have X equals, after I put that in the calculator, about 63.8 feet. So that's how tall our flagpole is. All right, so I'm going to ask you to pause the screen. I'm going to ask you to try number 1, and then we're going to go from there. All right, so there's that first practice problem. The archer shoots an arrow with an angle of elevation of 42 degrees at a target that is 50 feet off the ground. How far did the arrow travel in the air? So here's my masterpiece. Here's my little person shooting an arrow. By that arrow at the bottom is 42 degrees, angle of elevation. So we're looking for those key terms. Angle of elevation of 42 degrees. And it says that the target is 50 feet off the ground. This is our target. We're shooting up into the air, wherever that target is. So I labeled that height 50 feet. And it says how far did the arrow travel. That arrow right there, I drew the arrow. You can see it's traveling on that diagonal. We're trying to figure out what it is. So then we're going to label our O, A, and H for whatever we have. So here is my hypotenuse, and this is my opposite side. So going to trig, which trig function we're going to use? In this case, we're going to use sine. So sine of 42 equals 50 over x. Again, create your proportion, cross multiply, and solve. Once we're done, x is approximately 74.7 feet. All right. The next one, an escalator has a vertical rise of 196 feet and a rise at an angle of 10.4 degrees. We can have degrees for the decimal. There's nothing wrong with that. So I drew out the picture just because I knew the vertical rise might throw a few of us off. So that vertical rise is going up and down like vertical, like on our coordinate plane. So here I put that going on my side of the triangle. And then you can see that I have rise at an angle of 10.4. Rise of an angle is the same as angle of elevation. So it's at that bottom corner going up. And then they want to know how long the escalator is. The length of the escalator, we all know we've seen an escalator. We're going on that diagonal. So now we're going to label depending where that 10.4 is. So x is my hypotenuse. And that 196 is my opposite. So we have another sine problem. So sine 10.4 equals 196 over x. Create your proportion, cross multiply, and solve. And for x, you should get 1,085.8 feet. All right, I'd like you to try the next problem on your own about the slide on the playground. So pause your screen, draw your picture, label, create your proportion, and solve. All right, so here's my picture based on my story. The playground is 30 foot long and rises off the ground at an angle of 24 degrees. Just a little typo right here. This should be 24 degrees. So here you can see that the slide is 32. The height we're trying to figure out, and again, it says rises off the ground at an angle of 24 degrees. So we're going to label, this is my hypotenuse, this is my opposite. So again, it ends up being a sine problem. So sine 24 equals x over 32. Cross multiply and solve, and x should be 13.04 feet. All right, and do a couple more. All right, so the first one I actually gave you a diagram because we're going to talk about angle of depression. So it says, from the top of a fire tower, a forest ranger sees his partner on the ground at an angle of depression of 40 degrees. If the tower is 45 feet in height, how far is the partner from the base of the tower to the nearest tenth of a foot? So you can see that this piece right here is our angle of depression. I'm just abbreviating it AOD. This is our height of 45. We want to know how far away that man is. So you can see that the angle of depression is really outside of our triangle. That's not really helpful. But what is helpful, and I'm kind of trying to go over it really dark, is that hidden transversal. So I know that this angle over here is also 40 degrees. So this is going to make my problem a lot easier. So I've used that piece that we talked about in the beginning, that our angle of depression is congruent to our angle of elevation. So now I can say that this is based on this angle here. This is my opposite side, and this is my adjacent side. Based on SOHCAHTOA, we're going to be using tan. So I have tan of 40 equals 45 over x. Again, we're going to make that proportion, cross multiply and solve, and x equals 53.6 feet. All right, I'm going to ask you to try to solve the next one, create that picture. It's going to be a little challenging because we are drawing pictures that we're not kind of familiar with, but do the best you can. All right, so I drew mine. And you can see my picture on that cliff diagram. My cliff, I'm just going to re-go over it with another color. So you can see here is my cliff right here. My cliff is 80 feet above the sea. My sea, I drew a little bit of waves right here. My boat's in red. And it says that we have that angle of depression. So the angle of depression is on the outside, that's 35. So I know that I can bring that angle in to make that angle down below also 35. When I label, I can say that this is my opposite side and my adjacent side, making another tan. So tan 35 equals 80 over x. X equals 114.3. Again, the biggest challenge with these problems is the picture. You have to be able to draw the picture and understand what's going on in the story to be able to solve your trig function. All right, the last one, you have that campsite. I want you to try to set up your picture and solve. I'm going to show mine. All right, so there's my campsite with my wonderful picture. So my campsite is up here on the top. That's my campsite. And directly below it is the mountain. All right, so you can see that here I have sine 15 equals 12.88 over x, and x equals 49.8 feet. So again, going back into that story, you have your angle of elevation, which I have right here. It says your campsite, I'll put that in a different color. My campsite is 12.88 miles away from the mountain. So here is my camp. And there's the mountain. And I'm looking at this triangle here. That's that triangle we're going to keep going back to. And we're trying to find how high the mountain is. All right, so we're going to try some practice problems based on this. Again, a little challenging based on the pictures. But all we're going to do is go through some practice and get through that.